Today I'm making a quilt with just 2 fabrics, and one of them is white. So really, it feels like I'm just quilting with one. And yet, that's all it takes to create something beautiful. Let me show you. I believe the real magic in quilting comes from how you use what you have, not from the piles of fabric or complicated patterns. Sometimes the simplest design with 2 beautiful fabrics is all you need. Let's start by cutting our fabric. We can do this in any size we want. Just know that the smaller the center square is, the smaller we'll have to make our strips. You'll see what I mean in a bit. I want a 3 3/4 inch center square, which means I need 1 inch strips. If I wanted big blocks, I can make it like 7.5 inch center square and 1.5 inch strips. As long as the total size of the strips all sewn together is the same size as the center square, you're good. We want 4 white strips and 3 color strips, the longer the better. Next step is sewing all these strips together, white fabric at the edges. And here's what I do to try and get my strips nice and straight. I use my 1/4 inch presser foot with a guide to make sure all my seams are even, or as even as I can make them. Also, we need to sew the strips in different directions. So if you start from left to right, the next one we sew right to left. I'm doing it with only 2 colors, but I've also done it in 3 colors, so white and 2 colors combined, which is pretty cool. But you can also try making each block in a different color, which will also look great. Let's press our strips, trying not to move them around or change their shape too much. Yeah, I'm not very good at this. They're a little bit wonky already. The next step is cutting these into 8-inch blocks. You can make them a bit longer if you'd like. We can always trim off the excess afterwards. And so far, this has been pretty easy. This pattern is called the Windmill Weave Quilt, and you can buy it on a website called Sospicious.com. Okay, so this is what we want it to look like, and I'm in love already. Now, I've been debating whether to do it exactly like it says on the pattern or just doing my own thing. And yeah, I decided to tweak it. Just because I think it will be faster, but also because I think this is a perfect opportunity to turn something that would intimidate you into something that's actually pretty easy if you do it the way I do it. So, the less intimidating way to do this would be to cut these 8-inch blocks into 2 squares, like all of them. That way, you could sew this like a regular 9 patch, as long as you make sure to match those seams perfectly. So when it's all said and done, it will look like a perfect straight line. That's what the pattern says. But I say, let's sew these blocks as they are, and for that, we need a partial seam. A partial seam is essentially a seam that doesn't go all the way down. So essentially, I stop midway. And the good news is you only need to make 1 partial seam for this whole block. All others fall neatly into place. And then once all the others are sewed, I go back and finish that seam off all the way down. And that's it. Not as complicated as you would have imagined, is it? Next step is to press and trim off the ends real quick. And this is what we have. Look how pretty this is. I cannot wait to see them all together. So let's make 8 more. Because this is a big sized block, we don't need many to create the overall effect I'm looking for. That means 8 3 3/4 inch squares, 32 strip blocks, and that's pretty much all there is to it. And by now, you already know what I meant when I said the smaller the center squares, the smaller your strips will be. Because essentially, these 7 strips sewn together need to be the same size as our center square. So we really need to fit all the 7 in there. Alternatively, you can make like 5 strips or even 3 if that makes you more comfortable with the whole thing. You don't need to overcomplicate things. Knowing your skill level and adjusting is a really smart way to quilt. It will keep you motivated. There's something so special about two fabric quilts, particularly when you pick a simple pattern like this one. It's quite magical to me how a simple pattern like this one, made with only two fabrics, can create this kind of wow effect so many other more complicated quilts can't. And I think it's all about the contrast, the way it's never really busy, which allows your eyes to take out the whole effect, and it's lovely. If you've never tried making a two fabric quilt, I strongly advise you to give it a try. It's fun, cost effective, and you'll feel so proud once you're done. Also, it saves us from the hassle of combining fabrics, which can be so overwhelming, particularly when you're just starting out. Even the fabric selection process can be a hassle. It's just so much easier to pick two contrasting fabrics and be done. And after I've sewn all of these, we need to press each one nice and flat and trim off any excess, like little tips poking out. And because of the way our block is built, it makes sense that the strip blocks are longer than we need them. It makes it easier for us to sew them, and they're easy enough to cut. And now comes the time to make our lovely quilt puzzle. Nothing to it, just randomly placing our blocks 3 by 3 before sewing. And look at that! Even before we sew, we can already tell how good this is going to look. And as far as sewing goes, there's not much to it. Just nest the seams to make it flat and to make sure all the blocks hit all the right places. And if we trimmed the blocks right, that should be really easy to do. So we first sew the rows and then join our rows together. And if I were to finish this quilt, I would join the rows with some quilts as you go, because I can't really say how I would quilt this otherwise. Maybe I could, stitch in the ditch between blocks, or I could outline the center squares. I really don't know. For me, a pattern such as this looks better without quilting lines to make it shine like it deserves. And we are done with our sewing. Time to press this nice and flat before I can show you just how lovely and awesome this quilt top looks like. It is possibly the wonkiest quilt I've ever made, but I'm completely in love with the effect. And this is what we get. How stunning is this? Only two fabrics used and it looks perfect. The contrast really does all the work for you, because if you look at it, the pattern itself is pretty simple. I love it. I hope you do too, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.